Welcome, Emma. Welcome to Leadership Inside Out. It is an absolute pleasure to have you today. I've been looking at your background, and you certainly have a really interesting story to tell. So, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Guy. I suppose everybody feels their own story is interesting. Mine, I think it's fairly unusual because I've sort of had two, if maybe even three careers spanning too long, 30 plus years. Um, but there is a link. The first career was in the publishing industry, which not notorious for its sort of commercial drive and rigor. But I grew up in a company which was very, very innovative and quite small when I joined it. It was run by an entrepreneur whom I greatly respected and was rather in awe of, called Paul Hamlin. And he had invented the packaging industry, which is not to do with cartons and boxes, but to do with finding a customer and then making a book, in this case, that would suit that customer at a price point that customer was prepared to pay. And you don't make the book till you've pre-sold it, which is fantastic for cash flow.
Wow.
But very difficult to do and requires people to understand that it's about profitability and meeting the customer's needs and not about gratifying your own desire to make a beautiful book. And some of my challenges in that part of my career as I got more and more senior were to do with managing extremely gifted artistic people who really just wanted to take wonderful photographs and have superb authors and didn't realize that if you actually paid £50,000 for the photography or offered a 10% royalty, you were basically saying, we're going to make this book at a loss. So I learned lots of really useful things about how to bring all the pieces together if you own a P&L and make a profit. But the most valuable lesson of all, I suppose, was how to, if you like, translate that into language and make a connection with different types of people who were all involved in that process, but didn't all see it in the same way that I did. And in the end, the company became less fun, I must say, because it got bigger. And my experience has always been that as companies get bigger, it's much more challenging to retain the relationship, the fun, the culture, the commitment of all your people facing the same direction. It's much harder. We went public, and then the company, after it had gone public, it was then sold to Reed Elsevier, which in those days was a sort of conglomerate doing all sorts of things. But a couple of years after the acquisition, had one of those new CEO strategic review moments, which we all dread if we're in the company lower down. Thinking what's next, and what was next was they moved to professional and business publishing only, and so anybody who was on the consumer side, whether it was magazines or books, was essentially up for sale. It took quite a long time to sell my part of the business. I was at that time running a P&L of about £50 million of turnover, and I suppose we had 100 plus people maybe across warehousing, distribution, sales, and the creative side of things. So that was and ultimately, I got laid off. I got made redundant, not very well, and over the telephone by somebody I'd never met, which was unpleasant. But it happened. That was the first time. It's not been the last time. It happened to me in my career. So, but it's not a trophy, but it was an experience, a useful experience, shall we say? I learned a lot, I think, from those years, particularly about what leadership means, about the importance of relationships, and about the importance of the ability to build those positive relationships with a whole range of different people. You can't be, I mean, you are the same person, but you can't present exactly the same face to every single person because they won't hear the same thing that you're saying. So you have to be able to slightly mirror people's styles and find the thing which will get them on side. And I used humor quite a lot because it's the thing that's kept me sane all these years. At least I hope so. And I have quite a strong sense of humor. Of course, it doesn't work with everyone, but most people, if you try hard enough, you can find something, and that's a good way of getting them to sort of warm up, open up. And as long as once you've got to that point and you've made some sort of connection, then I always find it much easier to persuade people to do things that you would like them to do, and maybe they don't quite see the same way as you. So after that point in my career, well, I kind of turned my back on the publishing industry because I thought, well, the publishing industry doesn't really want me.
No.
I developed all these skills. I don't really want it either because I think it's only going to be the same, only worse, actually, if I go anywhere else. So why don't I'm just about young enough to change horses and do something different. So after a long time of talking to a lot of people and writing a lot of letters, and they were letters in those days, not emails, I landed a job at KPMG in their consulting practice.
Yes.
Which was pretty extraordinary, really, because I had never heard of KPMG. I didn't know who the big 5, 6, whatever they were then were. And when they said they'd been looking for somebody for ages to run their publishing consulting practice, I thought, how weird is that? Because nobody that I know in publishing would spend any money on consulting because they all think they know it all themselves, you know. But anyway, I needed a job, so I said, you've come to the right place. You've found the right woman. I am the answer to your prayers, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I found it quite hard, actually, to adjust from being in an industry where you're combining to make a product and selling it to a consumer, albeit not an individual, but you know, it might be a Marks and Spencer, or it might be Barnes and Noble in the States, or whoever. But you know, you knew what you were creating, you knew who you were creating it for, and it was a kind of comprehensible universe to me. And I moved into this other world where I didn't know what you were selling, really. You were, I suppose, selling an answer to a problem. Often the client didn't really know what the problem was. And I certainly didn't know what the problem was. And I certainly didn't know what the solution was, because, you know, I'd never worked in that field before. So I suppose part of me responded really well to that challenge, because part of me felt, part of me always gets excited by something that I haven't done before, by something really difficult, or by something that's hard to get your head around. I kind of like unpicking a problem and trying to understand what constitutes it, and therefore what the answer might be. Having said that, it was incredibly stressful, though, because, you know, there's a sort of assumption if you work for a company like KPMG and you go in and see a client, they're extraordinarily, seems to me, they were then anyway, extraordinarily sort of credulous. They kind of thought that you must have all the answers and that you did have all these wonderful methodologies and God knows what. And I knew that I didn't, and I wasn't entirely convinced anybody else did either in my organization. So, I mean, we won some projects, we delivered some projects, met some really interesting people along the way. And on the whole, we think we did more harm than good as an organizer in my team, you know, helping people. But it was very much making it up as you go along. I hope I'm not dropping anybody in it, but it's too long ago, really. I'm sure it's much less, inevitably, because it's more competitive, and clients are more discriminating. I think it's much more professional now than it was then. But I was definitely in the gifted amateur box, really. But then along came the typical challenge of having children. And initially I felt I felt that I was so committed to my career that I would, my children could have a nanny, everything would be fine. And it sort of was on the surface, but the pressures of being a mum and being a functioning professional person who has their head above water and is sort of doing all the right things and doesn't need help and isn't struggling, all of that stuff. I had a pretty hard time during my latter 30s and early 40s, I suppose. Principally, I would say principally self-induced, because you don't have to be perfect at everything. No. And no job is worth ruining your health for, whether it's your mental health or your physical health. I think if I had one lesson that I would I would try to bang into myself, my younger self, is for God's sake, look after yourself. You only have one life. Not only do you have to look after yourself so that so you're functioning, but it's quite a good idea to try and enjoy it. And if you're forever on a treadmill, whether it's a lovely treadmill of looking after kids or whether it's the treadmill of working in a large organization which puts you under a lot of pressure, what time do you have for yourself? Very little, unless you deliberately make it.
Yeah.
And I can see that now. I can see it very, very clearly. But at the time, I was too busy running around the treadmill, So it was a tough old time for quite a long time. And after a while, I did actually decide that I should take a back seat from client work and find some internal roles which would at least enable me to to get home at night at a reasonably sensible time, and hopefully to be able to sort of park my thinking and come back to it in the morning rather than chewing things over overnight.
Can I just say, as an outsider, I mean, you're almost blissfully talking about moving from running a business as an MD to then going to work for a partnership, which is an entirely different culture, client facing, with none of that consulting background, which, as you say, has its own speak, has its own expectations. I mean, this is very impressive. I mean, and then you want to have some children. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think looking back on it, because I know what it meant, as you do, because you've got sort of points of comparison. I think looking back, I'm quite impressed that I managed to do it, actually. But the point about, it's funny actually, the point about language, I remember being absolutely amazed that everything had to be in bullet points, because I wasn't used to bullet points. And this sort of consulting gobbledygook that would come through was just weird. It's kind of a new language that you sort of have to learn. But I always decided I would learn the language so I could communicate with my colleagues and I could understand what they were talking about. But I was damned if I was going to do it myself. Because in my book, if I'd been sitting on the other side of the client table and I had spouted gobbledygook, I would have spouted gobbledygook and I would have thought, who is this wombat, so I translated and always tried to translate the gobbledygook into something which would connect with the individual on the other side of the table, because I've always felt one of the advantages I had was that I had sat there, so I knew the pressures that some of these people were under. I knew that actually they didn't really want somebody to come along and say, this is your problem and here's the answer. They really wanted somebody to come along and say, I hear you have a problem, tell me about it. Because not only would I then find out more about what it really was, but they would have somebody that they could actually speak to, because a lot of these people are incredibly lonely and stressed. And I remembered that place, So, and it stood me in very good stead, because that way you tend to build relationships, not just transactional relationships, real relationships with your clients. And from a business point of view, that's what you want in order for them to ring you up and say, I've got X problem. And then you can say, oh, I know somebody who might be able to help you, and point them in the direction of the decent bloke who's intelligent and who doesn't speak gobbledygook, who can help them. Because if they go in through, I don't know, the switchboard or something, they could get anybody. And I've met some really, really interesting, good, impressive people over my career, and it's the best thing about a career in professional services is the number of different industries, businesses, and people at relatively senior levels. And it doesn't matter; they don't have to be at senior levels, but those tend to be the people I kind of feel I have something in common with, kindred spirits, if you like, because been there, done that, and it's a huge privilege, I think, to have that window on so many different worlds. But it's a privilege that you have to use with respect, because it's really that the trust that people put in you is considerable, and you have to take it really seriously. And I loved that, and I found I missed it when I went to internal roles. It relieved some of the pressure, but actually it didn't provide the kind of stimulus and excitement and interest. And just dealing with the internal workings of a partnership full of enormous egos, and some of which were a lot bigger than the brains that were associated, was quite hard work, and sometimes irritating and occasionally quite boring. So, but I suppose I thought it was a price to pay to keep my sanity, spend more quality time with my children while they were growing up, growing through their sort of, puberty and teens and so on. And then when they got to be more or less functioning young adults, and they felt they didn't really need me so much anymore. They probably did, but they weren't around quite so much. I wanted to go back into client work because I knew that don't get me wrong, I was nervous about it, because I may sound like the sort of person who never doubts myself, but I'm actually not that at all. I'm a classic imposter syndrome person who just has to prove myself time and time and time again, which is a bit of a pain, really. But my daughter's inherited it, and I'm trying to teach her the good bits about my experience before she gets to the bad bit. But I did find that I missed that intellectual stimulus and social, if you like, stimulus of those additional and I suppose the adrenaline actually of a project where you have to deliver something, and it's quite tough, and there's a timetable and all of that. So I had to find. I'd moved around all over the place within KPMG, because one of the things about firms like that is they have huge numbers of little kind of pots of expertise doing all sorts of things. So you can actually, if you get known to be a good sort who will sort things out and be helpful and won't be a nuisance, and that was where I needed to play when I was doing internal roles, which is could be irritating sometimes if I thought I could have done something better myself, but I couldn't. I just had to sort of quietly suggest things and let them come back to me as my boss's idea and all of that good stuff. Anyway, I eventually heard that there was a practice starting up, which was going to specialize in joint ventures and alliances. I didn't know a great deal about joint ventures as equity joint ventures, how they worked and how they were different, but I did realize that this was about helping people to effectively to set up and run or improve the way that it was running a business. And I thought, well, that's going to require me to look at things holistically, and that's what I missed when I had to do specific elements of something on a project. So bringing the ability to see the whole picture, and then also to be able to break it down and see who were the key people and what were the key functions that would pull that together. Those were some of the skills, and that was some of the experience, which would be helpful in this new setting. So I just put my hand up and said, because they were recruiting internally for resource, so I said, well, I'm looking for something. How about me? And I was taken on, and I suppose, to be honest, it was a bit like going into consulting from the publishing industry in a way, because I just sort of got involved in projects and learned how JVs work and alliances work, and how collaboration does and doesn't work, and what to look out for and what to avoid, and all of that stuff on the job, if I'm honest about it. I loved it. And I do love it, because it's all about the things that I learned from, way back in the days of Paul Hamlin and the entrepreneurs and so on. It's all about people, really. And then below that, of course, there are all the sort of, have you got the right policies? Have you got the right IT? Blah, 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 blah. But it's all about, is the idea a good one in the first place? And then have you got the right people? Have you got people who can actually work together? And then have you got the right sort of plan and the right this and the right that? There's a sort of logical process to it, which I quite like, although I'm not a very processy person. And it enables you, because people need help. I mean, it sounds weird, because on the whole, in my experience, people often think that those sorts of collaborative deals, which are not M&A, they're something slightly different, and they may even just be contractual. So you don't actually need M&A advisors or whatever. You just need a lawyer, so they say. But actually, as so often, what you need is a sounding board and a person who's seen this multiple times before, maybe in a different industry, maybe in a different geography, different setting, but nonetheless there are similarities. And why would you not listen to that experience before embarking on something which, it's quite time consuming. Making an alliance or a cooperative agreement, let alone a JV, work is at the very least resource consuming, because at the management level you have to kind of set it up right, and then make sure, monitor it, and build the relationships with the people on the other side, and whatever your goal is from this. So I love doing that. I wasn't always able to do that, and in a way I've been doing more of that since I stopped working for a company which was only interested in big projects, and particularly where there was equity involved and we could get a success fee or whatever it was. Because often the value is much more in the conversations that you can have with people who are saying, well, should I, shouldn't I? I'm thinking of this. I've had an approach from this person. It feels right, but I don't know what the next steps are. It's relatively small interventions early on that can help people avoid a mistake, or just ask the right question. And that I really enjoy, because I don't know, I think my motivator for everything I do is really, can I make a difference? And if I can I make a positive difference? Can I help, I suppose, at its most basic? And I think I can in almost any setting where those sort of collaborative ventures and the need to think through risk and identify opportunity and identify what it takes to deliver on that and to avoid the risk. But also, just to be a good listener who maybe could have a little bit of advice if you need it, if you ask for it, That's what I've been doing, because now I'm doing, most of what I'm doing at the moment is, I am a NED for a very small startup And there I find myself saying, whoa, yes, that's a great idea, but actually shouldn't we be focusing on the main point, which is getting to revenue? So I'm being a bit of an old nagpot on that one, but mostly being a trustee on a couple of charities, being an advisor on a small company board, which is doing educational training. And there, it's really, they just want to tap into my experience, and sort of, I think it's just different perspectives on a problem which, they're very, very close to. And as a non-exec or a trustee, you're at 60,000 feet, but if you're somebody who's been down at the coalface, you might ask the right kind of question, but you're coming at it from an outside in kind of angle, which often they have the answers themselves, but until you ask the question, they don't know what the answer is, if you see what I mean. They're sort of thinking as they go along, and that's a helpful process, I think. And most boards, I think, should be that's the primary function. I know a lot of them are about governance and compliance and all of that, but actually I think a lot of it's really about helping your executive team to see things more clearly, to challenge themselves, and to sometimes to grasp nettles, sometimes to just to grow up and not kid themselves, sometimes to be braver about the opportunity. It can be any of those things, but wow. It's just that sort of gentle external supportive challenge that is valuable, and I love doing that. It would be great to get paid really well to do it, but honestly, doing it is the key motivator for me.
I mean, Emma, what an amazing career, and there are some themes that I hear very loud and clear: communication, willingness to help, willingness to take risks, to be thoughtful, but courage is a sense that I feel. The courage to go into new industry, to give up partly what you love for family, to again within an organization again go into something that you have little background. I mean, that's a really strong theme that I hear running through your career.
That's interesting. I mean, you're right. I think you are right, and I think it's something I've had fed back to me occasionally from team members, because I mean, I'm a terrific believer in the value of a team, and sure, teams need leaders, but my experience of leaders, the leaders I respect and the type of leader I like to be is the kind that listens and the kind that respects other people's points of view and is prepared to have the outcomes shaped by those people, because I think it's the combination of the people around the table who make things happen and make the most robust ideas and the execution plan for those. But what I also feel is that if you are the leader, you have responsibilities to your team, and one of those is to step up for them. If they need your support, if they need you to speak up because the team is being dumbed down or one of them is being treated badly. I mean, I don't think a leader should ever let one of their team be treated in a way they wouldn't like to be treated themselves. That's a really fundamental part of my, what would you call it, value set, I suppose. But what I find is that people really respect that. It's the kind of thing that inspires the kind of loyalty that I really I feel very touched by, and means that you keep in touch with those people and they keep in touch with you, and that's lovely. It seems to me to be obvious, but it's like many things that I think that as to me as a person feel that they're the obviously right thing to do and the thing to do, but unfortunately one sees so often that they don't get done. And I think it's the courage to stand up for your team. But it's also, watching people who in leadership roles above me dodge issues which they carefully put in a too difficult box, and which I know, and they know, if they were honest about it, are going to pop out and hit them, or probably other people as well, or instead over the head later on. I believe you should grasp, if there's a nettle, you should grasp it. And I've had to do that sometimes in difficult circumstances, with people who are struggling and are in the wrong role. And nobody likes to tell anybody that they're not doing so well. No. But I think sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do is to help people to identify why that is and what might be something that might be better. It's a process which requires you to actually kind of gently push somebody out. Yeah. But I think you're pushing them, well, if you do it well, you should be pushing them towards something and make it a learning experience for them. And I've had to do that 2 or 3 times in my career at KPMG and previously. And on the whole, people do, even if they don't thank you for it, you can see that actually it was a jumping off point for them to go and do something else. But I think there's nothing more miserable, nothing, than being in a job where people are kind of saying, and you're never going to make it, as they say, and you're always at the bottom of the pile and never get the promotion and blah, blah, blah. Because people do know. They're not stupid. They know that. Sometimes they just need a bit of help about what to do about it.
Well, and I mean, again, wonderful advice. But the other thing that sort of struck me as well is that, you've made no secret that you've gone into leadership roles not being the expert. And I mean, I as a compliment, this concept of leadership being the best in the team, you clearly have recognized the more modern approach where leadership is all about bringing the best together, providing guidance, support, facilitating the team. And I mean, you're a wonderful example about how that can work so successfully.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope so. But it's also, what's nice is that it fits my personality, fits my style, fits the way I've done leadership through my career. But it also segues very nicely into the work that I do, helping other people to collaborate, because those are some of the skills that you need. You need a sort of a listening approach, a facilitative approach, a more input is bound to result in something that is better coming out the other side, even though the process itself might be quite painful occasionally, so it's good to have something that is coherent, if you like, across that. And it's probably why I enjoy it, what I do, so much.
You've talked about values.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly those are very important, but are they articulated, or are those things that you've sort of come through as your career has progressed, or are those foundations that you've built your career on?
They're probably things I've built my career on. Okay. But I think I've probably become more conscious of them, mm-hmm. and more able to articulate them as I've matured and reflected back on decisions that I've made, ways that I've done things that have upset me, things that I felt strongly about, things that I would have done differently if I'd been able to. I think the fundamentals are all about integrity, really. I think if you have to be the person that you are. If you're trying to be somebody different, you're probably you're not going to make yourself happy anyway. And it's hard. It's really tough to do. It's really tough to do. So people who find themselves, I really feel sorry for people who find themselves in an organization whose culture just doesn't fit them, but it's kind of either they feel they can compensate for that for their team. That's a tough place to be, and I've been in that place. Or they feel that they have, too much to lose, and they need to make a go of it, and they kind of kid themselves that it's not doing them damage. I think that does do damage to one's, whatever it is that makes one the person that one is. You can't, something that is so disjointed is going to hurt you at some point, I think. So I feel, integrity is a word that matters to me, and because it's part of this sort of do as you will be done by, walk the talk, all of that stuff. But it's also about being honest, open and honest with clients. So not saying to a client that you can do something if you can't do it, or that you will do something which is the wrong thing because you get paid for it, but explaining to them why you think it's the wrong thing for them, and if then respecting their decision about that. But those are sort of, if you like, red lines for me. I just can't be doing with. I remember I was working once with somebody who was actually lied to a client about the number of times we'd done a particular type of project because he was desperate to win this project. And I was on the call, I was listening, and my jaw was sort of dropping like this. Fortunately, we weren't on Teams. And after the call, I rang him back and I said, don't you ever lie to a client, not when I'm around. I will not put up with it. And he kind of blinked it and said, I wasn't lying. I said, I know a lie when I hear one. That was a lie, and I'm not having, it wasn't great for our relationship, but I felt better afterwards because I thought, I'm kind of disowning this behavior. I was so shocked. And maybe I'm very naive and I have led a sheltered life. It doesn't matter, actually. If people roll their eyes and say, oh, can't get through life. You can, and you should. And if you have your own set of values, you live by those. And if it costs you, promotion or money or whatever it is, I don't care. I feel comfortable in my skin with the person that I am, and that's the most important thing, really.
I couldn't agree more. It may cost you in the short term, but in the long term, it will only benefit you. So
yeah, exactly, because you only have one life.
Yes.
And I think it's important to make as positive use of it as you can, really. And it's more fun that way too.
Absolutely. So what does the future hold, Emma?
Well, who knows? My crystal ball is as good as yours or as bad as yours. I don't know. What I want to do is to find, more and additional ways of using my skills and experience to help organizations, not necessarily companies, but potentially companies. I mean, at the moment, I'm looking for a company which is sort of already at a certain amount of scale, but is looking to get to the next level, because I think that's where people tend to need to forge collaborations and partnerships as a sort of jumping off point for the next stage. And I think my experience and my skill set kind of that's the sweet spot for me. But I imagine that's I don't know how I'm going to find those, really. I do a lot of networking, so hopefully I'll find them. But if I don't, then I'm in touch with a few companies which I do occasional JVs, and they know that they can tap into my experience if they need to work alongside them, and that's quite fun. I love working with my with the charities that I work with, and probably there's space for a bit more of that, which would be good. Maybe some straightforward volunteering. I have a dog who is the love of my life, 18 months. He's about 18 months old. I've had him for about 18 months. And what I might do is see if I can enroll in. Can't remember what it's called, but there's a charity that where you go with your dog into special schools, hospitals, care homes, and it's sort of pet therapy kind of thing. And I think, I mean, judging by how people respond to him, I think he'd be quite good at it, and I think I would find it an additional sort of joy alongside what he already gives me. And it would, if it was helpful to people, that would be grand.
Wonderful. Sounds brilliant. Looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would say, don't forget to look after yourself. Be kind to yourself. You know, I was somebody who was forever feeling that I hadn't quite done things as well as I could, and that maybe I could do a little bit more, and, you know, just trying so hard all the time. I think I forgot to look after myself. I forgot to look after my friendships, some of my university friendships that I mean, I kept in touch with people, but I probably didn't spend as much time or keep as close tabs on people as I could have done. And I've had a few mental health difficulties over the years, some of which were probably genetic, looking at it now, because there's sort of various bipolar type genes in the family. But I don't think I've ever been very good at asking for help and admitting that I'm struggling, and, you know, respecting the fact that, you know, or understanding the fact that everybody has difficulties, even the people who look as if they don't, and that there's nothing wrong with asking for help, and there's nothing wrong with saying that you're struggling. It's much better to do that than to keep struggling until something happens which forces you to take time out or whatever. You know, burnout, I think, is a significant problem for people these days, because there's so much, if you're in work, there's such pressure on you to deliver. If you're out of work, there's such pressure on you to feed yourself and pay the bills, you know. You know, call it burnout if you're working. I don't call it whatever if you're not, but it's the same thing. It's really, really tough. Or in fact, it's probably much easier actually if you're working, because you do have the luxury of taking holiday or asking for leave or whatever it is. You just have to swallow your pride, really. So I would say be kinder to myself is the primary one, actually, because self-esteem is so important, and just being aware that people are there to help. People actually quite like it if somebody in a senior position reveals something about themselves. You know, I think I did try to compartmentalize work and life a bit. It felt like a way of coping. It was probably a way of, it's not a way of, it was a way of not coping in a way. It was just a way of knocking out certain thoughts when I was in one life from when I was in the other. But you can't lead two lives, you are one person. So fortunately, you know, I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful daughter and a wonderful son, and they talk to me about everything. And so some of these things that I've been through, and, you know, my daughter suffered a bit of a burnout. She's an academic, and had to sort of, you know, unpeel the onion and understand why. And she's very, very good at that now. But we have great conversations in which I share some of the things that haven't happened to me. And both my son and my daughter, they say, really? Oh, sure. Really? But it's great to be able to to share these things, actually, because I think everybody needs to hear from people who've been through difficult times and come out the other side that it's just part of being human. Living life is not easy. It's not easy for anyone, and anyone who tells you it is probably kidding themselves and you. So life's going to throw you some wobblies, and coming through that, the key things to take the learning from it.
Wonderful. What wonderful advice. Thank you. Any last reflections before we finish for the session?
Really, I don't think. I mean, I thought this might be, except to say thank you, because I thought this might be quite difficult, but actually it's felt very natural just chatting. So I think that must be down to you, Guy. So thank you.
No, my absolute pleasure, and I'm absolutely grateful and feel very privileged to hear stories such as yours. It is, will say it out loud. I love doing this because it's a chance for me to learn as well, and that's always a good thing. But also, it's an enormous privilege to hear and reflect and hear the stories. So thank you for myself.
That's a great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.